I read these 10 comics a few months ago, so my memory might be a little sparse on them, but I will do my best. The first comic on this list is Ultimate Black Panther, which is written by Brian Hill with artwork by Stefano Caselli. Ultimate Black Panther is a part of the Marvel's new Ultimate Universe run, which is an alternate version of the mainline universe, where the Maker, who is a evil version of Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four, goes to another universe and remakes it in what he believes should be the right world, which is one where evil rules over. All the heroes that you know and love don't exist in the form that they do, and a lot of them are actually evil. Within this universe, the Black Panther lives on the African continent, where colonialist Moon Knight and whatever the Sun Day version, Ra, I think is his name, those two people are these gods who rule over and seek to colonize and have been colonizing Africa. And Wakanda has stayed out of it because Wakanda wants to keep to itself and avoid having their resources, specifically vibranium, extracted. Finally, when the colonists come to their shores and start attacking their people, it makes them, and especially T'Challa, the main character, Black Panther, rethink Wakanda's approach. This is very, very similar in a lot of ways to the Black Panther movies. The first half of this comic book run, I think, is pretty good. It expands this world in an interesting way and approaches it in a way that is sort of familiar, but pacing and story-wise does it in a way that feels new and refreshing. I really like all the characters here. They're given a lot of depth and opportunity to be flawed characters. And I think the story it's building up is really interesting. In the second half, they introduce the, spirit of vibranium, which is this sort of evil entity that sort of exists to examine what it means for Wakanda to be entirely reliant on one resource, and what it means to be reliant on that one piece of technology, and how that can be sort of corrosive. But it presents us in a way that the spirit of vibranium is this sort of doomsday-esque evil monster, and it ends up with people just kind of fighting him a bunch. And I found that kind of boring. This comic's, I think, clear and biggest weakness is that its artwork and paneling is really dull for how, I think, fun and interesting the story is. Most of the action here feels entirely formless and awkward and stilted, and so many moments that I think could be emotional are cut down by the fact that the artwork is so bland looking. Again, it's been a while since I've read these, and so I have lost a lot of the specific information. But in totality, I remember finding this interesting and entertaining, but also sort of ultimately weak and underdeveloped in a lot of ways. I think this should have been given more time to fully flesh out these characters and worlds. I think its approach is interesting, but I think the execution makes me want more. Because it feels like it was trying to get to an end when it, I think, should have gone on for quite a bit longer to let us sit with these characters and this world and examine this stuff in a far more conclusive and expansive manner, instead of now where it really feels like, even though it's 24 issues long, which is, I think, quite long, 23 or 24, I think you could have gotten so much more out of this. Yeah, in total, it's, I think, decent. I think out of all of the Ultimate stuff, it's one of the better ones. I have some hot takes for later ones, maybe. I don't know the opinions on these. I haven't been the biggest on the Ultimate line, but I thought this one it's okay. I think it's worth checking out if you like Black Panther, and if you want an interesting Marvel comic. The next comic I read was Batman The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb with artwork by Tim Sale. This is a story from the 90s, I believe. It's about Batman trying to solve the murder of a serial killer who goes by the name Holiday, who murders people on famous holidays. And it all wraps up or begins on Halloween. This is a quintessential classic Batman story. And when I say quintessential Batman story, I think there's a couple that go with that I have not enjoyed. Like The Dark Knight Returns and Hush sort of rolled off me. Batman, I think, is cool, but there's not really any that I think have gripped me as much as this. Batman The Long Halloween is a detective story featuring all of the essential Batman characters, all the villains. Catwoman's in it, the Penguin. It has all of the, thematic elements and character moments that you're trying to get with Batman. It feels like a origin story as well. It feels like a really good starting point if you want to get into Batman. I think what makes this comic works so well is that the central mystery that they are solving is so engaging and interesting. It feels really like a detective story more than a superhero story, but filled with these like sort of kooky characters. The artwork here by Tim Sale is gorgeous. The shadows and colors here are so beautiful. It looks like a poppy neo-noir story. Out of all of the, I guess, traditional and more like famous, I guess, maybe this wasn't not traditional because I think this was like late 80s or 90s, but these kinds of stories, I think this one might be my favorite. Maybe Superman for All Seasons also goes up there, but it's so much contained within, I think, a 6 to 12 issue, I don't remember, somewhere along that. So much of what that makes that character essential, and also, like, just so wildly entertaining. I think it feels like Batman in his truest form, in that it's, like, really silly, but takes itself so seriously. And it just has this, like, just beautiful artwork. Highly, highly, highly recommend if you like superhero comics. And it's not, like, the deepest thing ever, but it's just a load of fun. The next comic I read was Beneath the Trees Where No One Sees, The Rite of Spring, which is the sequel comic to Beneath the Trees Where No One Sees. This one is written and drawn by Patrick Horvath. This is a serial killer story where all of the characters in the story are rendered as animals, and it follows a unassuming woman who is actually a serial killer. In the original series, it was her dealing with another serial killer coming to town and sort of like ruining things for her. And in this one, it's her slowly being caught on by the people who were murdered by her in the first book, or family members of the people who were murdered by her in the first book. And she comes to the sort of conclusion that she can't really escape from this, but finds enjoyment in that because she's a psychopath. I think this comic's really fun. It's a really good, like, crime, sort of, like, horror manga. It's really gruesome. You know, there's a lot of scenes of them, like, cutting apart and, like, blowing apart these, like, animal people. And it's all, like, pretty effective like that. But I think it's more interesting as a character study of this small town. The main character is a psychopath kind of character, so she doesn't really care about emotions or anything, but the way she functions is so interesting, and how she, like, interacts with this, like, tiny town and the people in it, and then slowly seeing it come unfurled where everyone realizes that she's the serial killer is really terrifying, and also, like, satisfying. I don't know if that's the right word. This reminded me of the way these comics are paced. The first one, and then this sequel feels like a movie to me. They are somewhat episodic because they are individual chapters, and in the first one, I think each individual chapter deals with a different murder. But these stories really flow like movies to me, and I don't know how to explain that other than that they're very brief and they flow naturally and reach these, like, sort of somewhat incomplete conclusions. Like, there's not really a moral. She doesn't even really get caught in the end. It's a really satisfying and fun read, while also being really creepy and gross. I didn't feel necessarily, like, emotionally attached to what was going on. This one's, I think, another one that's more pure entertainment, but I think there's worse things to read. The next manga I read is 20th Century Boys by Naoki Urasawa. This is, I think, the quintessential Naoki Urasawa book, maybe behind Monster. I'm not sure which one you would put first. This follows a man named Kenji and a bunch of his old school friends, who notice that a cult leader named Friend is puppeting and using a lot of their childhood imagination and the things they imagined as a child and wrote about as a child, about, like, secret bases and, like, using robots to end the world. He's repeating these to actually take over and seek to end the world. Tonally, I think this is more of a thriller, but it's also so not focused on giving you answers. I think a lot of the time you don't fully comprehend what's going on, and it is constantly jumping forward in time and jumping between periods and characters to the point where you sometimes can't really tell what's real, because there's also this, like, video game world they have to go into sometimes. Despite the fact that there's no real, I guess, not conclusion, but the point of the series isn't that they find out who did it or what is going on. It's not really about the answers, it's about the journey and what it means for these characters. And I think it is ultimately about, I'm not going to say childhood trauma, because that feels too slight and like silly of a phrase, but it's the only phrase that's popping to my mind. Childhood trauma and how that affects people, and how that affects people's personality to go on to do things like start cults or become a like fascist dictator, and how much these childhood weaknesses and insecurities go on to affect how people become as people and become bad people. Maybe I think that's too simple of a reading with this. I found this, especially the ending, to be somewhat impenetrable. There's so much going on that you can take from this, and I took it as a reading of fascism as something that is, and cults and things of that sort, as something that is inherently kind of childish, but also that resistance itself through like music and things like that is childish, as not childish, but sort of playful in a way that is good. I think 20th Century Boys is a phenomenal work. It's not my favorite Urasawa. I think I like Monster a lot more because I found it easier, I guess, to digest, but it's also one that I have already kind of have a hungering for revisiting. With ones like these, it's hard to describe why I like it so much, because it's hard to describe, I guess, what it's about. This is a long series that follows like a 24 characters, I think, across, presumably like 30 or 40 years. And so it covers so much ground and so much time and so much ideas and so many tones. Like, it's deeply sad from a moment, but it's also really, really comedic. Unlike really anything I've read, except maybe you could compare it to Osamu Tezuka, which I'm presuming, like every manga author, he is a fan of and was inspired by, obviously, because he wrote Pluto, which I need to read. I think that's what maybe actually I like the most about it, and it's the tone it's able to strike up, and it's this mixture of comedy and tension and sometimes sadness, and it's able to swap between these modes on the same like page and even panel sometimes, and every chapter is like its own weird little piece. It's not necessarily this one massive cohesive thing. It feels like it is constantly shifting what it's about and what it's trying to do. And I think that's why it's hard to like grasp, is because it's this like modular, ethereal sort of thing that is difficult to place. I know none of that probably articulated what makes it great, but I think it's really phenomenal, and I think you should read it. It's really good. The next comic I read was Miles Morales' Spider-Man, the 2022 run, which I think ended in either late 2025 or early 2026. It was written by Cody Ziegler and with artwork by Federico Vicentini. I think it might change artists later on and throughout because it was a long-running series. I think this was a monthly series, and there was in totality about 36 issues. I like the word totality, can you tell? I read this issue 1, I think the month it came out, and then continued with it every month pretty much since it came out. And I really, really enjoyed the beginning arc, which is about a supervillain who is directly connected to Miles Morales. And then as it goes along, I lost a lot of interest in it, but I kind of kept reading it. Like, it's so bad that I stopped reading it, but it was bad enough that I don't remember a majority of what happens in this. I remember that there was a whole plot line where Miles Morales gets, like, attached to this god of, like, spiders and stories, who this is, like, I think, Native American god, and then has him fight in, like, a god war where he fights a bunch of gods. Didn't care about any of that, and I think this story sort of runs its wheels on Miles Morales as a character. I think he doesn't really do much, and he doesn't really go anywhere. I don't think it's the worst. I think the previous run, where he gets, like, tortured a bunch, was way worse, but I think this one, I feel like I don't care about him very much. He's sort of, like a lot of these superheroes, once they reach, I guess, popularity, they're too afraid to change them too much and do interesting things with them, so they sort of have a lot of stories about, like, self-discovery that are sort of, like, slight and, like, not particularly interesting. I also found most of other than the very first arc, or I guess, like, first, like, 6 issues, all of the villains and stories are, like, really forgettable. There's, like, a whole part where I think he goes to therapy that I found to be sort of therapy speechy, which I know these are like for teenagers, I guess, but it just, I don't care that he's going to therapy. I like Glob though. Glob is this guy, I think from one of the previous things, who's like a false clone of Miles Morales. And he's this like big blobby guy who kind of looks like Miles, but he's like big and weird. And he can like kind of barely speak. And in this issue, in this run, he gets adopted into the family and like accepted into the family as basically his big brother, or I guess little brother. And they like take care of him and they take him to school. And I think that's fun. I think that's cute. I like the idea of this sort of like kind of gimmicky, weird character becoming like essential to Miles Morales' character and like a sidekick. I think that's like really fun. I like Glob. Glob is cool. Yeah, I don't remember a majority of what happens in this. I found this sort of, it rolled off me. I think it's not very good. It has good parts, but it's overall, I don't think it's very good. The next comic I read was Ultimate X-Men by Peach Momoko. This is another one in the Ultimate universe, and in this world, the Ultimate X-Men are a group of teenagers in Japan who have to fight for mutant rights against a X-Men-esque cult and, I guess, a repressive government. I think this one starts out really, really strong. I remember the first, 8 issues really loving it. I think it was really well paced, slightly more like a manga where it was taking time to build out its world and characters. And Peach Momoko's artwork is stunning. It is beautiful looking. I sometimes struggle with telling the characters apart, but mostly it's fine. I think this takes the X-Men in an entirely new direction, and at the beginning it doesn't always work for me, but I like how fresh and new it is. But unfortunately, I think this ends up floundering and then ultimately failing in the end, unfortunately. I think it ups the pace too quickly. It introduces way too many characters, and I got to a point where I just couldn't tell what was going on, and I couldn't remember who these characters were, and I stopped caring about anything that was going on. Peach Momoko is a beautiful artist when she's working at her best, but later on I found the paneling to be really unengaging and slow or too quick. I think it's an interesting new setup for the X-Men, but I didn't find that it did anything really worthwhile with it. And because it had to fit within this, I think, 24 issue time frame, like all of them have to, because I think they're all coming to some sort of conclusion now, it doesn't leave enough room for these characters to really flesh out, and it's really trying to squeeze in all of these stories with all of these characters, when it should have been, honestly, probably like a 50-issue long-running series to just really let it breathe. And it doesn't do that. So by the end, the last, 10 issues, I read because I was just reading them. I thought about dropping it a lot, but I did not like where it was going in the end. Or what I not necessarily like, I didn't care and I didn't really understand what was going on because it's just so convoluted and there were too many characters, there's too much stuff going on. I like Peach Momoko as an artist. I don't like her as much as a paneler. I don't know how to, it's the paneling doesn't work. And this isn't the only Ultimate comic that does that. All of them do this, actually, now that I think about it. I am eventually probably actually going to reread these and see maybe if I'm wrong and re-experience the first couple issues to see if I just liked the newness of it and then got sick of it. But I think ultimately I don't like the series very much. I don't think it's very good. Okay, now here's where we get into what might be the hot take of the video. I actually don't know. I don't follow or keep up with what other people really think about comic books because I find the conversation sort of mostly asinine. But it's Ultimate Spider-Man, which I did not like. Before we get into that, Ultimate Spider-Man is written by Jonathan Hickman and has artwork by Marco Cicchetto. Ultimate Spider-Man takes place in the Ultimate Universe where all the evil people has taken over, and Spider-Man, Peter Parker, at this point, didn't get his powers when he was young and is now married to Mary Jane and has a full family and feels like there's something missing from his life. He gets reached out by the Iron Man of this world who is seeking to right the wrongs, and so gives him a serum that makes him into Spider-Man, and then he becomes Spider-Man and starts fighting Kingpin, who is, I think, the president of New York, which is a city, which is a city-state now, I think. Something around that. Good first. There are several individual issues within this that I think are pretty good. I think there's one with Mysterio that I think is really, really great. and I think the way it expands upon and like changes Spider-Man's lore and the character's lore is really interesting. I also think Harry Truman, is that the president? Is that the guy's name? Green Goblin. Green Goblin, Harry Goblin. When Harry Goblin, I think as a character, Harry Green Goblin, Harry Goblin. It's too goddamn hot in this room. Harry Goblin. Harry Goblin is a really, I think, fun character. I like him. I think he's complex and interesting, and he has this sort of moral grayness around him, but he's never actually turned into a villain, which I love. Like, he does some things that are, like, Spider-Man disagrees with, and he has some, like, problems where he, like, has an AI of his father who's, like, being really mean to him the whole time because his real father before he died was really mean to him. So he's like, I have to have my father being mean to me. I think overall also the comic, compared to the others, which I think between individual issues, sometimes they will skip time. And so you feel like you're following Spider-Man over like a year and a half instead of like one continuous story. And I think that pacing works really well most of the time. I think that's like a fun way. It makes every issue feel like interesting and new, but also while still part of something big. But I don't like Peter Parker, or really most of the other characters here, as a character. Everything goes right for him too much. I think it feels like an inverse of what they're trying to do with Spider-Man, where a lot of Spider-Man is superhero problems and interpersonal problems. But this one feels like it's trying too hard to fix his interpersonal problems and give him this sort of like happy life. The reason MJ and Spider-Man have so much marriage problems and things like that is because it gives the stories emotional tension. And maybe it doesn't always work. I haven't really read a lot of Spider-Man. But in this one, they're just these like happy, perfectly happy couple, and there's no conflict at all around them. And it makes their character dynamic and seeing them together so boring because they're just two characters who are like, man, aren't we in love? Don't we just love each other? Isn't our life awesome? Even though we might die and be killed by all these evil people. And sort of the same thing with the kids. The kids are all like too sweet and friendly. There's some later stuff with an older kid who falls in love with like Black Cat, who's like a teenager in this one. That part's like kind of fun. But the worst I think part about this book is I really, really hate the paneling. It's so uninteresting and bland. It reads like an Infinity comic, like one of those you scroll. There's so many like blocks, and like sometimes they don't even like change what is happening between scenes. Like it's like a block of his face, and then the next one is a block of his face, and it's the same photo basically, but then just the dialogue is changed. I didn't care about anything that was going on. I was entertained briefly every once in a while, but I found Spider-Man and his whole family in this to be really boring. There is, I think, Ben, his uncle, is alive in this one, and J. Jonah Jameson are like teaming up to start their own newspaper company aside from the Daily Bugle, and I think those are two fun characters who have, I think, a fun dynamic. I think J. Jonah Jameson is like a kind of a good guy in this one, but he's still a little bit of like a jerk sometimes and like self-centered, but in a way that is like entertaining and like fun. And I think watching them do all that, which it's not a lot of it, but like them doing that is really fun. I think it's, unfortunately, I don't like it, and I don't think it's very good. And I think other people like it, and I can understand why. Because I think out of all of the Ultimate stuff I've read, it is the best. Not all of them. I'm not talking about Ultimate. I think Avengers or the Ultimates. The Ultimates is leagues better than the rest of these. But out of all of the ones I'm reviewing in this video, it is the one that feels the most, I guess, put together and comprehensive. I just really, really, really do not like the paneling on this. It is so ugly, and it ruins the tension, and it makes it not fun to read. It made me mad half the time. Maybe that's just me. It's not just me. I'm right. Okay, the next comic I read is way better. It's Dick Tracy versus the Underworld. I actually own this one on physical copy. I found this for $1.50 at Half Price Books. This is written by John Moore with artwork by Kyle Baker. Incredible artwork in this. This is a one of 3 comics made as a prequel to the Dick Tracy movie from the 90s. I have never seen the movie. I have never read any Dick Tracy at all. I don't know anything about this guy other than he's like generally a detective. But I found this and I looked in it, and the artwork, I don't know if I can show you the artwork actually and it will like show up well on the camera, but I will attempt to. The artwork is so, look at that guy's mouth. Look at that. Is this working? The artwork is so beautiful and lively in this thing. I promise I'm going to do more than just showing off images in this, but I could look at this thing all day. I'm so happy I own this on my shelf so I can go and look at it. The actual story of this is him like finding a guy or something. There's like a mob boss who got like facial reassignment surgery, and I don't really care about this story, to be honest. I think it's fun, but it's this sort of like pulpy crime thing, which isn't really my thing. I find them sort of asinine. But this thing is just a delight to read because it is just so, paneling wise too, it's beautiful. The artwork in this thing is just unimaginably beautiful. This is book 2 of 3, but it can be read on its own as a standalone. Yeah, I don't really have much else other to say on that because this is one to look at the artwork, but I think this one's such a worthwhile read. This one's so cool. Look at this guy's big ears. Look how big this guy's ears are. Isn't that awesome? This is what all art should look like. This is how you make a comic book. Okay, the second to last comic I read is X-Men Epic Collection Proteus. I decided to keep this one as an Epic Collection because I am getting through Chris Claremont's X-Men run just through the Epic Collections that they've released, which I've been reading on Hoopla. Shout out Hoopla. This is written by Chris Claremont. This is the quintessential X-Men run, with artwork by John Byrne, and it is inked by Terry Austin. I haven't been saying the inker for all of these, I probably should, but Terry Austin, shout out, this thing is beautiful. This is the second collection. The first one is Second Genesis, which I think is, character-wise and story-wise, leagues better than this one. I think Proteus is still a lot of fun. All these stories are really silly. There's one where the main title of the story, which is the last one, where there is this mutant who hops between minds and is like going on a rampage trying to kill people. And then there's one where they go to, I think, the Savage Lands and have to protect this like tribal culture from these like evil robot guys, I think. And then Storm is like hailed as a god there. There are all these stories that kind of don't really have anything to do with the X-Men as themselves in the same way that the first one was. And I think a lot of these kinds of stories in modern stuff and stuff that doesn't work really annoys me because they feel so like, why are we even doing this? But I think Chris Claremont is able to make these so engaging and fun, and obviously a lot of this has to do with John Byrne, who is a phenomenal artist and a phenomenal paneler. This thing is so much fun to read, and there are so many sequences that are so tense, and the stories they're telling to be on like a whole scale, I don't really fully care about like the characters or like fully what's going on. I find it a little like just too poppy and too like, I guess, childish in a certain ways to like fully connect to it in the same way that I think I connected to the characters and everything in the first Epic Collection and those stories. I think I really did. But Chris Claremont and John Byrne are still able to make it so engaging and fun. And I think I can understand why this is like the quintessential X-Men run, as also I think the quintessential like Marvel Comics run. I can understand now reading this why Marvel Comics were as big as they were. Because I've read some old ones. I've read like old Spider-Man. I've read some like very old X-Men stuff and some newer stuff. But like this era, I haven't really read. Is this the Golden Age or is this Silver Age? I don't know. This is the Claremont Age because it's fantastic. It's really fun. It's really cool. I'm excited to read more. The final comic book, or it's a manga, that I read of the last 10, I've read like 9 since I finished this one, so there will be another video very, very soon, is Chainsaw Man, which came to its final conclusion a few months ago. Chainsaw Man, if you don't know, is a manga about a guy who turns into a chainsaw and hunts demons with it. You've probably heard of it. You probably have read it or watched the anime at some point. I think the part 1 I really like. I liked it so much that I got the actual manga itself. I loved it when I first read it. It was like one of my favorites. As times passed, I've sort of stopped caring as much, and I reread it not that long ago and watched the anime, and it's good, but I don't love it as much. But part 2, which is what came to its final conclusion, and the whole thing came to its conclusion, which takes place after the conclusion of part 1, and I think part 1 works really well as like a sort of complete whole, and then part 2 was, I think, intended to expand upon that in interesting ways, and I think it starts doing that at the very start. then it stops doing that, and then it starts sucking. I think the biggest disappointment in this with me is not necessarily that the story kind of sucks and it loses itself in a lot of what it's doing. I think it's still doing some interesting things, but it does it in a way that is like boring and ugly, I think, a lot of the time. I think Tetsuki Fujimoto is a really, really, really phenomenal panelist and artist, and I think that's what makes these first issues, despite, I think, all its flaws. I don't really care about much of the characters going in here. I don't really care about Denji, to be honest. But it's so much fun to read because there's so many good images, and the paneling and the fight sequences are so tense and fun and interesting. And I think as it goes along, especially probably the last year, I think it has been, like, consistently boring looking. Like, there's no images in this that stick out, or, like, fight sequences, or ideas that stick out to me from the last year. I'm gonna be honest, I remember the ending because I read it not that long ago, and because it sucks, to be honest. It's a really bad ending. But I don't remember, like, anything that happened before that. There was, like, a Chainsaw Man cult, and that plotline sort of dies. There's also this book. It's intended to be sort of an inversion of shonen tropes. So the main character is this sort of, like, lovable, dumb idiot, like a lot of, like, Naruto and, like, Natsu from Fairy Tail, I guess. But he's also this, like, kind of weird, creepy, not creepy, but, like, horny teenager. And I think that's fun at first, but he doesn't really change much, and I think the conclusion it reaches for him as a character is extremely stupid. I think it doesn't work. And I think that the secondary, I guess, main character they introduce, who is, like, a girl, I think her name's Asa. I think she's a fun and interesting character. Early on, she has some really, really funny parts. But I think, again, it just kind of ends. It's a really bad ending. Whatever, it's fine. It's fine. Having a bad ending, I don't think ruins things. I think there's plenty of things that I think are great with having bad endings. It's just the most recent thing I've read. I still think the first, 11 to 12 issues in this are a lot of fun. I think they're definitely worth reading if you like shonen action stuff. I think there's some great artwork and paneling. I also think they're getting at a lot of emotions and ideas that are never really presented in these sort of manga, and I think that's, like, cool, but I think it could be done so much better, and unfortunately it, I think, entirely kind of flounders in the second half. Okay, those are the last 10 comics I read. I will have another one of these pretty soon. I'm also thinking about making a book video about the last 10 books I read. Do you guys care about Midnight Sun? The Edward Cullen perspective Twilight book? Because I could talk about that. That's one of the last books I read. That one's pretty interesting. If you like this video, leave a like, I guess, and comment below a manga or comic I should read. I will maybe read it. Maybe. If you guys think this video sucks, or if you have things I should do better in the video, don't leave them. I don't want to get a new camera. I don't want to get a new microphone if the audio sucks. Harry Goblin. Yeah, subscribe or whatever. I don't know how to end these videos.